Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. The FBI estimates that there are between 25 and 50 serial killers operating in America at all times. A few years ago, a new serial killer was uncovered, but he is just now going to trial. Usually when a serial killer is discovered, you hear things like, he was a quiet man who kept to himself, and we had no idea we were living next to a monster. He seemed totally normal. Well, buckle up and try not to get as angry as I did while researching this man, because that is not the case here. This man was a known psycho. Everyone in his purview knew that he was dangerous, and yet very little was done to keep the public safe from him. If there is a case that proves just how desperately we are in need of systematic change, it's this case. After nearly 2 decades, some very cold cases have now been solved and linked together in the worst way possible. This serial killer took girls in the South in the late 1990s, and he got away with it for a very long time, but he won't get away with it any longer. This is the story of William Reece. Let's get into it. April 3rd, 1997. 12-year-old Laura Smither, who lived in Friendswood, which is a suburb of Houston, Texas, told her mother that she wanted to go for a jog. This was unusual, as Laura wasn't a runner, but her mother said she had recently been inspired to start doing more cardio because it would improve her ballet, which is what she loved. Laura said goodbye to her mother and ran out the door. Her family never saw her again. About an hour after she left, Laura's parents became very concerned. They contacted the police, and very soon, hundreds and then thousands of volunteers were searching for Laura. Her parents, Gay and Bob Smither, were beside themselves with worry, and the community rallied around them and supported them during this crisis. They searched near and far from Laura's home, looking in ditches and fields and behind businesses. The media quickly picked up on the search efforts, and soon everyone in the area knew that there was a missing girl.
Within 10 minutes, the policeman was here at the house taking our missing person report. And by that evening, I'd made a number of phone calls to get more people to come help, and we had spent the day searching all over the area.
Did you see anything unusual at this time yesterday?
Yesterday, no, not at all.
And by that night, the media had got wind of it.
Her parents say she went out for an early morning jog in the neighborhood of 9 o'clock this morning along this very road and simply never came back.
And so all the trucks had already shown up and helicopters were circling the house, and the next morning there were hundreds and hundreds of people. And very quickly, leaders within our community stepped up and organized the search.
Searchers could barely put one foot in front of the other.
I've been overwhelmed by the community support and the police.
What was it like for you and your family last night?
Don't ask me.
She is a very good girl. Something very unusual has happened that she would have been home. There's no question she would have been home.
Years later, Gay Smithers said that she is still very touched that so many people came to the family's aid. In the weeks after Laura disappeared, over 6,000 volunteers covered 800 square miles looking for the girl who had simply wanted to go for a run. A week went by, and then 2. Hope started to diminish that Laura would be found alive. On Sunday, April 20th, Laura's parents sat in a community meeting in the auditorium at Friendswood High School with the police and citizens, discussing what steps needed to be taken and giving everyone an update on the case. Gay's heart sank as the police officers' beepers began to go off. The officers slipped quietly out of the room, and Gay and Bob went home. Around 10 o'clock that night, there was a knock on their door, and they already knew. They just knew. Laura's body had been found on the edge of a pond by a man walking his dog about 20 miles from where she had disappeared in Pasadena, Texas. It had been 17 days since her parents last saw her. Laura had been beaten and strangled. The citizens of Friendswood were shocked and saddened to hear the news. As is often the case in these small area murders, people began to talk, and they began talking about one man in particular. The man they were talking about had a known history of sex offenses, and he had been working in the area near Laura's home. That man was William Reece, and he had only been out of prison for about a year. William was brought in for questioning, and the police all felt they had the right guy. Reece had been let go off work early the day that Laura disappeared because of rain. He left work right around the time Laura went missing, and he showed back up at work about 30 minutes after he left. Now, I couldn't find any information on why there was no DNA present to test, but I'm assuming that the fact Laura was found in the water or near the water may have played a part in that. This was 20 years ago when DNA testing was not nearly as advanced as it is now. Even though authorities believed William Reece was Laura's killer, they simply did not have enough evidence to do anything about it, and they had to let him go. Okay, that's understandable. I get that. I get that they didn't have enough to charge him. Here's my issue. If you know that you've got a killer on the loose, or you're pretty sure, and everyone involved believes this is the guy, where is the community protection from the guy? We always hear a lot about perpetrators' rights, and they do have rights. Of course they do. But we don't hear enough about the rights of citizens to be protected from known criminals, especially from people like this one, someone under suspicion for killing a child. I won't spend too much time on my soapbox today, but we have got to put into place programs, some kind of monitoring that takes place during situations like these. There always seems to be enough money to buy, the best cars and the best gear for the cops, and they should have the best gear. But where is the money to assign one guy, maybe just one guy, to keep a constant eye on a suspected child killer while you gather more evidence? You hear what I'm saying? I'm not saying I have all the answers, and I know this is a complex problem and people's civil rights are involved. I get that. But simply letting someone go with no monitoring or surveillance of any kind, that ain't it. That's not the thing to do, but it is the usual thing that happens. And I'm just saying, I think we can do better. That's all. Unfortunately for so many involved, William Reece was not being monitored, and he was also not finished kidnapping and killing. May 16th, 1997. 19-year-old Sandra Sapah, who was pregnant at the time, was using a payphone at a gas station in Webster, Texas, when she noticed a man was staring at her. Do you ever wonder why so many horror movies involve women using a payphone? It's because they were literal death traps. I hated using a payphone when I was a teenager because there was always some greasy creeper hanging out there waiting for a girl who needed to use the phone so he could talk to her, like always. Men like that, they knew you needed to use the phone and they would just lurch around the payphone, forcing you to talk to them. It just, you guys that are my age, you know. Even if you're not my age and you were a little kid using payphones, you remember these guys, right? These guys that hung around the payphones. Sandra Sapah hangs up the phone and she goes to her car and drives away. And the entire time, this man is just staring at her. He's watching her, everything she does. As soon as she starts driving, she hears a loud noise and realizes that something is wrong with her car. Her tires had been slashed. So she pulls over near a Waffle House to see how badly her car had been damaged. And guess who pulls up behind her? William Reece. He offers to help her with her car, but as he walks towards her, he pulls a knife on her and forced her to get into his truck. Unfortunately, Sandra got into the truck with him. Never go to a second location, my dears, never. If they say they're going to kill you if you don't go with them, let them shoot you or stab you right there in the parking lot or on the side of the road where you have a chance of being found or making a scene and getting help, because what they're going to do to you at the second location is much worse. Never go to a second location. Remember, this was 1997 when true crime stories were in their infancy, so someone like Sandra didn't know this. How could she have known this? I wouldn't have known that back then, not even close. She gets into William Reece's truck and he drives them onto the interstate while forcing her to undress. Sandra knows she has got to save her own life, and she does the smartest thing anyone in this situation could do. She waits until there are other cars around them, and then she opens the door to the truck, which is going 70 miles an hour at this point, and she jumps out. Her body tumbles down the interstate at great speed, and she sustains very serious injuries, but girl, she is out of that truck and she is alive. Sandra is able to give authorities information on the man who abducted her, and they begin to hunt for him for the next few months. But in those months, he has plenty of time to do a lot more damage. August 17th, 1997. 17-year-old Jessica Cain was headed home after attending a theater cast party with her friends. Jessica loved performing, and she was thrilled to be involved in plays and drama productions where she had the opportunity to show off her talents. After a night at the theater, she went to a Bennigan's restaurant for a cast party in Clear Lake, Texas, with a group of people. Afterwards, she got into her car and headed towards home. No one but her killer ever saw her alive again. At the time, authorities were not aware that William Reece's sister lived in the same neighborhood as the restaurant, and Reece had most likely been sitting and watching the girls go in the restaurant before waiting for them to come out. Jessica's family knew immediately that something was wrong, and they began looking for her. Soon, they were joined by many volunteers from their community. They searched on horseback and by car for days. Not long after her disappearance, a friend of Jessica's spotted her vehicle abandoned along I-45. It appeared as though her truck had broken down, and people went to the police and reported they had seen Jessica walking towards another vehicle that had stopped alongside of the road by her broken down truck before she disappeared. Her wallet was still inside the truck, but Jessica was nowhere to be found. It wasn't a car wreck or an accident. She had simply vanished from her vehicle. Volunteers searched for weeks and then months, but no one found Jessica Cain. Once again, William Reece was on the list of suspects. The Tiki Island investigators looked into William Reece for months, but there was never enough evidence to arrest him. For a second time, he is allowed to go free. Jessica's loved ones would not have any idea of what happened to her for decades. July 15th, 1997. 20-year-old Kelli Cox, who was a University of North Texas student and mother of a 19-month-old little girl, took a tour of a local Denton jail with her fellow criminology students as part of her course study in college. Before the students took a tour of the jail, their instructor told them not to bring anything into the jail with them. They were to have someone drop them off, or they were told to use a hide-a-key for their vehicles because they weren't allowed to bring their keys into the jail with them. It's just wild to me how something like that, so small and insignificant, like being told you had to use a hide-a-key, could lead to something that changes your whole life, that ends your life. Kelli planned on using a spare key. She kept it in a magnetic box in the wheel well of her car. After the tour of the jail was over, she got to her car in the parking lot and retrieved the spare key from the metal box, but the spare key wouldn't unlock the car door. It had worked just fine the night before. She and her boyfriend had actually tested it. Now, I believe that the key was switched out, but we don't know because it was never found. Kelli walked across the street to a gas station where she used a payphone to call her boyfriend for help. She went inside the gas station and bought a drink and walked out to go and wait for her boyfriend to arrive and help her get into her car. Her boyfriend arrived at the location and there was the car locked, as Kelli said it would be, but Kelli was nowhere to be found. After a brief search, Kelli's family knew that something terrible had happened to her. Kelli was a loving mother whose entire world revolved around her little girl. She would never, ever abandon that baby. Kelli had told her mother that the happiest day of her entire life was when her daughter Alexis was born. Kelli was working very hard to provide a life and a future for her and her child, and everyone who knew her said they were convinced that something had to have happened to her because she just wouldn't leave. Her family immediately printed up flyers and began passing them out. In the days following Kelli's disappearance, police were inundated with phone calls and hundreds of false leads, people claiming they had seen Kelli, but all of those leads went nowhere. Days went by and then weeks, and before long the trail was cold. Kelli's mother, Jan Bynum, started attending missing persons conferences across the nation, and soon she was being asked to speak at those conferences to share her experience as the mother of a missing child. At one of those conferences, Jan met the family of Jessica Cain, the theater student. The family spoke of their shared experience and offered comfort to each other, but they had no idea of just how similar their experiences would turn out or how closely they were linked. July 26, 1997. A police officer named John Reed, working in Bethany, Oklahoma, was doing his rounds downtown. He noticed a white Dodge Neon sitting in a stall at a local car wash called Sunshine Car Wash, and he realized he had seen it before hours ago. It had been sitting there all day. He approached the car and saw that it was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. The car's mats were still hanging up on the wall in the clips that you put them in to spray them off. There wasn't anyone around, and he realized something is wrong here. He opened the glove box and found a leather notepad with several numbers written on it, and one of those numbers was a pager number for someone named Ryan Johnston. Ryan Johnston was already aware that something in his life was very wrong. His wife of 2 months, Tiffany, had left home earlier in the day when he was at work, and she had never come home. She also hadn't left a note, which is something she would do if she were going to be gone for a while. Ryan was out searching for his newlywed wife when his pager went off, and it was the Bethany Police Department. Ryan called the police office, and he was told that his wife's car had been found sitting abandoned in a nearby car wash. And at that point, both Ryan and the police knew Tiffany was missing. Realizing that the small department was way out of their depth, the Bethany police called in the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations for help. The day after Tiffany went missing, there was an incredible coincidence. 3 people who were out searching for another missing woman in a totally unrelated matter noticed something strange in a patch of tall grass along the highway. The grass had been pushed to the ground and smashed. As they neared the patch, they saw her, a woman lying face down in the grass. She was not moving. The searchers called the police, who arrived at what they found to be a dump site. There lay Tiffany Johnston, wearing nothing but a floral swimsuit top. Her body was covered in red markings and her face was covered in blood. She had been strangled manually and a ligature had been used at some point as well. She had bruises that indicated she had been bound before her death. The doctor who performed the autopsy swabbed her for DNA, and police chased down every lead they had, but the case went cold. Tiffany Johnston was buried, and for years her murder went unsolved. Fall 1997. Police in Sandra Sapah's abduction had continued to look for William Reece, and he is finally located, and police feel they have enough evidence to arrest him for the kidnapping of Sandra Sapah. In 1998, Reece was put on trial, and thankfully he was sentenced to 60 years in prison for what he did to Sandra. This, no doubt, saved countless lives. Now remember, Reece had been in prison for a good portion of the early to mid-1980s. He was a dangerous man. He was known to be someone who stalked and hurt women. The fact that he went to prison, lives were spared because of that. There's no question about that. When William Reece was arrested in 1998, his mugshot was all over the news. And to no one's surprise, additional victims come forward, stating that he is the man who tried to kidnap them, who threatened them. William Reece was sent off to prison to begin his very long sentence. But the police looking for the missing and murdered women in the other cases do not forget about him, and they do not forget about the victims. And after many years, a detective does something that changes it all. 2015. An Oklahoma cold case cop decides to contact the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigations and ask them about the DNA swabs collected from Tiffany Johnston's body. He wants to know if there is enough DNA to test, and he wants their opinion on whether or not they feel there is enough material to get a sample. The staff reviews the evidence, and they tell this detective that yes, they think they can come up with a DNA profile of Tiffany's killer based on the evidence they have in storage. This is why DNA cold case storage testing is so important. It's such a passion of mine, and it's a big reason why I started this channel. I'm really hoping in the future to raise money to donate to departments that need funds to test cases that have never been able to be tested. The evidence they have from Tiffany's crime scene is tested and compared to the number 1 suspect, William Reece. It is a perfect match. They know without a doubt that William Reece is Tiffany Johnston's killer. Back in Friendswood, Texas, cold case detectives have never forgotten about Laura Smither. They too have been working that cold case, going back through the evidence and backtracking through time to see if there is anything that might help them. Using William Reece's phone records and gas receipts, Texas authorities are able to piece together William Reece's travels, and they can verify that he was in Oklahoma when Tiffany was killed, and he was in Texas when Laura, Jessica, and Kelli were killed. In September of 2015, authorities have gathered enough evidence. William Reece is charged in the murder of Tiffany Johnston, and a date for trial is set. This is a really upsetting detail in this case. William Reece actually knew Tiffany Johnston's mother. He had been in their house. He was acquainted with the family. He actually called Tiffany's mother and told her, "I'm sorry about your daughter. I heard what happened to her, and it wasn't me." That tells you something about William Reece and the people who knew him. They knew this guy was dangerous. They knew this guy had it in him to kill people. Tiffany Johnston's mother was friends with William Reece's mother. And Tiffany's mom feels like William Reece's mother knew that her son was Tiffany's killer. Every year on the anniversary of Tiffany's death, someone would leave a little token on Tiffany's headstone. It wasn't always on the exact date of the death, so it's not like they could sit and watch the gravesite. But when William Reece's mother died, those little tokens stopped appearing at her grave. That is actually really chilling. You know, I'm sure this woman didn't want to turn her son in if she thought he might have killed Tiffany, but it tells you she had guilt. Tells you she had a pretty good understanding of what he was. It's really kind of sad if you think about it, you know. I mean, what if somebody in your family was a monster? Tiffany's mother doesn't think William Reece ever met Tiffany, but he knew her family through his mother. And I mean, can you imagine finding out that your daughter's killer had called you to give his condolences? I mean, that's a lot. As William Reece sits in prison, something totally unexpected happens. He begins to confess to other killings and names the victims police have somewhat tied to him over the years. Now, he's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart, of course, because there is no goodness in his heart. He is doing this to try and save himself. He believes that if he confesses, he can get authorities to take the death penalty off the table for him. He knew he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison, but he did not want to spend time on death row. He wanted to be in general population where he had more freedom. Life on death row is very different from life in general population. William Reece was known to like his TV and his hot showers. In fact, once he was in jail and the hot water in the jail showers wasn't working, so he fixed it. He cared that much about his hot showers. He liked his creature comforts, and he had decided that he was going to start talking so he could continue to have those things he would not have if he was sitting on death row. Authorities bring to William Reece photographs of not only Tiffany, but of Laura, Jessica, and Kelli, and they ask him, "Do we need to look into any of these girls? Are you tied to any of these girls?" And William Reece said, "Yes." The cops asked him, "Okay, which one?" And he waved his hand over the table, over all of the photos, and says, "All of them, all of these." At that point, the investigators start getting very specific with William Reece about where and how they can find the bodies of the victims who are still missing, who have been missing since the late 1990s. Reece starts talking about the events surrounding each of the murders, and of course, he tries to say that the girls got scared and ran and fell and hit their heads, that it was an accident, that he never meant to hurt anyone. It's the same crap these guys always say. He says he was drinking heavily, that he wasn't himself, and he actually seems to begin to believe that he's kind of friends with the cops that are interviewing him. He speaks openly with them, and the conversation is easy. Some of the cops said he was just a regular guy that you'd have a beer with. But Reece continues to blame others, to blame his drinking, and to even blame the victims for what he did. He even said that Jessica argued with him after he stopped to help her when her truck broke down. He says that he blacked out and he doesn't remember what happened, and that the only thing he remembers is that she wasn't breathing. He said he took her body to a barn and used a bulldozer to bury her. Investigators go to the location where William Reece tells them to dig and begin doing just that. They search and they dig for days and then for weeks, but they don't find Jessica. They then take William Reece to the site, and Reece gets frustrated and he says, "She's right here, you're not digging deep enough." So they dug deeper. Still, no body. Then investigators take a map to Reece, and they realize he's been looking at the wrong fence line on the map. So the place where they were digging was off because he was off on the map. So once they clear that up, they return to the correct fence line, and they very quickly uncovered Jessica's remains. She was right about where William Reece said she would be. About a week later, the entire process starts over, this time looking for the remains of Kelli Cox. On the second day of searching, they found, there in the dirt, Kelli Cox's bracelet. Her mother was contacted to verify that Kelli owned that bracelet, and she knew at that time that Kelli was nearby. 2 days later, as the digging continued, they found Kelli Cox. Finally, after all those years, the families of Jessica and Kelli had their girls back. Their families reported that the nightmares finally stopped. They stopped wondering if their loved one was somewhere being tortured. They were finally able to get some peace. All of the work, all of the searching, all of the digging, the interviewing came to an end. One of the investigating officers during an interview asked William Reece, "What's going through your mind right now? What are you thinking? Do you feel sad? Do you feel any remorse?" He said Reece paused for a moment and then looked up at him and said, "You might not understand this, but people like me don't feel any remorse." In September of 2016, Reece was indicted for the murders of Laura Smithers and Jessica Cain. The following year, he was indicted for the murder of Kelli Cox. It seemed like there was finally going to be some closure, but William Reece wasn't finished with these families yet. William Reece begins to make things as difficult as possible for the families and for the authorities. Tiffany's mother said he had more than 20 attorneys. He files continuances, and he does whatever he can to drag out the proceedings. A year goes by, and then 2, 3, 4, and then, of course, the pandemic hits. That put a near halt to the proceedings. Time continues to press on, and William Reece continues to sit in jail. Although this is frustrating, it's just a really good thing that he was locked away. I'm sure it was difficult for the families to wait, but man, I am glad he was locked up. Yeah. Finally, after years and years, it's time to move forward. May of 2021. The trial on the murder of Tiffany Johnston begins. Laura Smithers' family attended that trial. Victims that the families didn't even know about came forward and testified that William Reece had attacked them. The families were not only traumatized by learning this about Reece, but they were mortified at how he acted during the trial. Tiffany's mother said that every time they brought out photos of one of the girls, especially the graphic photos, that William sat fixated on the screen. He was engrossed in the story, and Tiffany's mother feels he was reliving what he had done. Ugh. Ew. The families of the victims are surprised to hear how candidly Reece speaks to the Texas Rangers in his interviews. Laura's mother believes Reece is such a prolific liar that he can't keep the truth straight. He can't even keep his own lies straight. He continues to try and manipulate the narrative. He is trying to somehow appear as less of a monster than he actually is. He wants the cops to like him. He wants to pretend he feels bad about what he has done, but everyone sees right through that act. The families and the jury sit and watch the interview tapes of William Reece, pretending to be a better guy than he actually is, and the entire time he sits, emotionless in the courtroom. At times, he glares at Tiffany Johnston's mother, who, remember, he knew. Other people in the courtroom are angered by the way he stares at her, but she is not deterred. At times, Reece even smirks and scoffs at evidence, but for the most part, he sits there like a stone. The trial lasted for 3 weeks, and then the jury went into deliberation. Prosecutors told the family it would probably be 3 to 5 days, for deliberating, but they were off. They were way off. About an hour after the jury went into deliberation, they returned. June 1st, 2021. William Reece is found guilty in Oklahoma for the murder of Tiffany Johnston. In August of 2021, the judge said to him, "Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice will no longer be denied. I sentence you to death." The family members expressed relief that it was over. Kelli's grown daughter said that she is grateful that William Reece will never leave prison and that if he lives long enough, he will be executed for the murder of Tiffany Johnston. The murder charges in Texas are still pending. William Reece has not been brought to justice for the murders of the 3 Texas victims, and we are still waiting to find out when Texas authorities will proceed against Reece. For now, the families are satisfied that he is locked up for good, and they all agree justice for Tiffany is some amount of justice for all of the victims. But Kelli Cox's mother and her daughter say they expect Texas authorities to take William Reece to trial. They want justice for their daughter and mother, and they want William Reece to be held accountable. They want that guilty verdict for their loved one. Authorities believe that it is very likely we will hear from William Reece again. They believe Reece is responsible for other deaths, and it is the opinion of most involved that he is holding information to use at a later date. They believe the next time he wants something, he will start talking again. Men like William Reece have no empathy or compassion. They only care about their own wants and their own needs, and I guess for now, we will have to wait until William Reece wants or needs something to find out if there are other victims, buried in a field or by a road somewhere, waiting for their story to be told. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to support me. It helps a lot. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death.